space race, something we've already faced before. Back in the 20th century, the Soviet Union and the USA were the two main competitors in the race to explore space. The race was fueled by political tensions between the two superpowers during the Cold War. It led to some major milestones in the space exploration, which eventually led to the first manned spaceflight to the Moon in 1969. Now it seems like the human race is going to face another challenge, and this time it's China and USA. Both of them have some serious missions prepared for the Moon. At this point, it may seem like just a harmless competition to us. But is it so? The Moon has some valuable resources that can potentially provide us with energy for at least 10,000 years. Obviously, every country wants to have access to them. But you know how it works. No resources were ever accessed without an actual fight. The question is the new space race going to be a new space war? In this video, we'll tell you everything about the USA's dominance in space and how other countries try to shatter it. We'll learn who actually owns the Moon, the stars, and if you can actually buy yourself one. Spoiler, not really. Together we'll learn everything about the current state of politics in space and what exactly the billionaires have to do with that. Shall we? Space Race 2.0. Who owns space? Okay, so let's start with the Moon. We all remember how Americans planted the American flag there. Does it mean that whoever reached it first owns it? Well, if it was that easy, no country or individual can claim ownership of the Moon or any other celestial body like planets, asteroids or stars. That means the Moon belongs to all of humanity, and no one can go and plant a flag on it to claim it as their own. However, this doesn't mean that no one can use the Moon. And as you may already know, many countries are planning missions to the Moon to conduct research and exploration. But wait. But if no one can own stars, how are some companies selling them? While some claim to sell star naming services, the truth is that buying a star is not really possible. The International Astronomical Union, which is the only organization responsible for officially naming celestial bodies, doesn't recognize the commercial sale of star names. All those fancy certificates and coordinates you receive are just for fun and don't hold any scientific or legal weight. If you previously bought a star, you can't really go to the nearest observatory and ask them to show you your star. It's all symbolic. But you know what isn't? Space Forces. Yep, this is a reality. The Space Force was created by the United States in December 2019, when the then President Donald Trump signed the National Defense Authorization Act. It established the US Space Force as the sixth branch of the United States Armed Forces. Now, fun fact. The people who work in the Space Force are called Guardians. That's right, they're not just regular old soldiers or airmen. They're just like guardians of the galaxy. The Space Force's motto is Semper Supra, which means always above. And look at their uniform. This 6-button double-breasted tunic drew comparisons to the costumes worn in the sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica. Moreover, the Space Force even has its own official seal. Its symbol, the Delta, signifies the service's responsibilities and also honors its long history. Yep, you heard it right. Long history. It all started back in 1954 when the US Air Force created a special group to take care of the military's ballistic missiles. Over time, this division changed and merged with other organizations as the US was putting more and more satellites in space for communication and missile warnings. In 1982, the Air Force created the first operational space command in the US military, Air Force Space Command. From there, the Department of Defense continued to build up its space capabilities, which eventually led to the creation of the Space Force. So basically, the Space Force is the newest addition to a long line of organizations that have been working to keep the US safe in space for almost 70 years. No kidding, that's an extremely serious organization, although its name and basically everything connected to it has sci-fi movie vibes. But I guess you still have some questions about their responsibilities. Yeah, not like there are aliens to fight with. So what's their main role? Well, let's hear their answer. Access to freedom to operate in space underpins our national security and economic prosperity. However, space is no longer free from conflict. Potential adversaries are seeking ways to deny the US access to the space capabilities fundamental to our way of war and modern way of life. They have developed an array of threats both on Earth and in orbit that continue to grow in scope, scale and complexity. Today, the guardians of the USSF have been called to protect and defend American interests, and to ensure our forces, our allies, and the world never experience a day without space. So the Space Force, unlike NASA, focuses more on enhancing the modern military's capabilities and effectiveness rather than research. From satellite operations to intelligence, the Space Force Guardians play a significant role in our daily lives as civilians. For instance, the Space Force operates 32 GPS satellites, and GPS is a widely used service that many of us depend on in our daily routines. So the Space Force is always present and contributing to our daily lives, even if we don't realize it. Of course, all of this is not exactly cheap. The US Space Force has requested a $30 billion budget for 2024, which is $3.9 billion more than what it received in 2023. And over 60% of that budget, which is approximately $19.2 billion, is going straight into research, development, testing, and evaluation. That means they're pouring in big bucks to make the Space Force even better, faster, and more effective. You may think that $30 billion is not that much, but that's until you compare it with the other military departments of the US. Overall, there are going to be around 9,600 Guardians in Space Forces in 2024, and they are going to receive $30 billion. Now, the other branches have around 614,000 people, and they're going to receive $255.8 billion. Let's do the math. $3,125,000 per person on Space Forces versus $416,000 per person in other departments. The difference is huge, and you may question why. Well, right now, there are a lot of technologies in the sky that are protecting US national interests. For example, there are early warning satellites that are designed to rapidly detect ballistic missile launches and enable defense military action. Of course, you want systems like this to run smoothly, and it's Space Force's job to ensure that. Feels like the USA is practically trying to create some kind of monopoly in space. But what about the other countries? Well, in general, there's something called the Outer Space Treaty that was created to protect space from any kind of ownership. Does it actually have any power? Well, let's see. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was the first attempt to create a peaceful arrangement of space activities. The treaty was signed by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, among others. It states that outer space is not subject to national appropriation, meaning that no country can claim ownership of celestial bodies like the Moon. The treaty also prohibits the placement of weapons of mass destruction in orbit or on celestial bodies. Was it successful? Well, in some ways, yes. The treaty has been ratified by over 100 countries. However, there have been some challenges and criticisms, such as the lack of enforcement mechanisms. Nonetheless, the Outer Space Treaty remains an important landmark of international space law. Although we should acknowledge that it's just a general framework for the exploration and the use of outer space which doesn't address specifically many issues. Unlike the Moon Treaty that was proposed in 1979, this one tried to establish a framework where space resources would be considered the common heritage of mankind. And that means that any resources extracted from celestial bodies such as the Moon should be shared equally. The treaty would also have required countries to share technology and scientific knowledge related to the exploration and use of celestial bodies. Basically, as critics say, it was some kind of socialistic agreement. But for space, as you may have already guessed, the United States, Russia and China did not sign such a treaty, and that contributed to its limited adaptation and implementation. To this day, only 18 states are parties to this treaty. However, in May 2020, the United States proposed another set of principles promoting peaceful and cooperative exploration of the Moon and other celestial bodies, Artemis Accords, and this one seems to be more successful. The main aim of the Artemis Accords is to establish a framework for international cooperation and transparency in space exploration. The principles include commitments to peaceful exploration, sustainable use of resources, and the sharing of scientific data. All of this sounds great, but let's take a look at the document. For example, Section 8. And what do we see here? The signatories are committed to the open sharing of scientific data. The signatories plan to make the scientific results obtained from cooperative activities under these accords available to the public and the international scientific community as appropriate in a timely manner. Well, nothing wrong with that. But let's read further. The commitment to openly share scientific data is not intended to apply to private sector operations unless such operations are being conducted on behalf of a signatory to the accords. Yep. So it's not a coincidence that there are so many private sector companies in the US doing research in this sphere. And Elon Musk with his SpaceX and big ambition to organize a flight to Mars soon. All of this makes even more sense now. Cause, well, in the case of private companies, they don't have to share the scientific data with others. Nevertheless, the accords were signed on the 13th of October 2020 by representatives of the national space agencies of 8 countries: Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Then additional signatories include Ukraine, South Korea, New Zealand, Brazil, Poland, Mexico, Israel, Romania, Bahrain, Singapore, Colombia, France, Saudi Arabia, Rwanda, and Nigeria, which makes it 22 countries. But I guess you noticed that one huge country is not on the list, or even 2. China and Russia, of course. Already in 2020, the Artemis Accords received some heavy criticism from those countries. Particularly, it was said that the accords are too centered on American and commercial interests. Russia has condemned them as a blatant attempt to create international space law that favors the United States. At the same time, Chinese government-affiliated media has called the accords akin to European colonial enclosure land-taking methods. Russia and China have since reached an understanding to work together on the Chinese International Lunar Research Station concept, which is particularly for third parties like India, a possibly competing proposal to choose from. Do you feel those space race vibes? I would even say space war vibes. But is China a serious competitor in the space matters? Well, it seems so. Artemis is not only an agreement, it's also a huge space program with many important missions. NASA sees Artemis as the next big step towards the long-term goal of establishing a sustainable presence on the Moon. In 2025, they plan to land the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the Moon. And already in 2028, they plan on launching the Lunar Surface Asset, a small habitat on the surface of the Moon. Being the first in the space race is extremely important for the USA. Before ordering the establishment of a 6th branch of the military, the Space Force, Donald Trump said, "It's not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have an American dominance in space." And that pretty much describes the US policy in space. But then China got involved. In recent years, the country has been actively involved in the exploration of the Moon through its lunar exploration program called Chang'e, named after the Chinese moon goddess. It's basically a multi-phase mission with the aim of studying the moon's geology, topography and resources, as well as conducting experiments and tests for future crewed missions. And it seems to be very successful. In 2014, China has achieved landing on the moon with Chang'e 3, China's first lunar rover. 5 years later, in 2019, the first soft landing on the far side of the moon took place. This was Chang'e 4 mission. At that time, Chang'e's lander carried a rover named Yutu-2, which was actively exploring the lunar surface. But the upcoming missions of Chang'e are even more impressive. Chang'e 8 is going to test the technology necessary for the construction of a lunar science base. It is set for 2028. The country also plans to conduct a crewed lunar landing mission in the 2030s. Russia also has some missions planned, although they are less significant. It will launch its first lunar space mission in modern times on July 13, 2023. Luna 25, the first domestically produced spacecraft of this type in post-Soviet Russia, will land on the surface of the Earth's satellite. The purpose of this project is to send a robotic probe to conduct research near the moon's south pole. And China and Russia announced in 2021 that they will be building a moon base together. The countries also formally invited more countries and international organizations to join their International Lunar Research Station as a competitor to the American Artemis. Will the space race between the US, China and Russia lead to an all-out space war, or will we see peaceful cooperation and collaboration for the greater good of humanity at some point? Well, the bets are on, the stakes are high and the competition is fierce. Perhaps as we continue to explore and understand the vastness of space, we'll come to realize that our differences pale in comparison to the infinite possibilities and wonders that lie beyond our planet. But that sounds too optimistic. Honestly, it's highly unlikely that any nation at this point is ready to give up its own ambitions. In the next few years, we'll see what exactly this competition brings us. One thing is clear. Space exploration and development will continue to be a major focus for China and the USA, shaping our understanding of the universe and our place in it.